In this video, I will be explaining about World War II. World War II was one of the deadliest, or even regarded as the deadliest war in human history, and setting up the stage for a world where nations would cooperate and maintain peace. World War II is completely related to the aftermath of World War I. After the Allied powers successfully defeated the Central Powers in 1918, the Armistice of 1918 was signed in November 11th, 1918, effectively ending the war. Peace was made on 28 June 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles being signed between Germany and the Allied powers. According to this peace, Germany had to dismantle its army by eliminating the air force, reducing the navy to nothing more than 6 ships without submarines and U-boats, and reducing military personnel to 100,000 men. It also had to lose over a tenth of its territory and pay huge reparations to the Allies. In 1929, with the Great Depression, Germany came into a global economic crisis, with the German economy collapsing. Adolf Hitler exploited the fear of the masses and used their fear and anger to raise his support. He claimed that he was the only one who could return Germany to its former glory and undo the Treaty of Versailles. In 1933, he became Chancellor of the German Parliament and got the Reichstag fire decree signed by President Paul von Hindenburg. In August 1934, he officially became a dictator and assumed the title of Führer and rapidly Nazified Germany. Hitler was racist, showing hatred towards Jews, Slavs, etc. He believed the German Aryan race was the purest and felt he needed living space for his Germans. He was willing to go to war to achieve this living space. Annexations. After assuming power in 1933, Hitler rapidly transformed Germany. The Reichstag fire decree ended freedom of the press and expression, with state-owned propaganda being the only source of news. Hitler introduced anti-Jewish laws and laws against other impure racial groups. He was assisted in this by Adolf Eichmann, who controlled and regulated the network of deadly concentration camps meant to exterminate Jews. He also commissioned the Gestapo, a secret Nazi police force meant to repress and arrest Jews, and then take them to concentration camps. Oh, and also, Heil Hitler! After securing his ideals in Germany, he planned to expand them elsewhere. He remilitarized the Rhineland, a region between France and Germany, in order to officially end the Treaty of Versailles. In 1938, he annexed Austria without any resistance, since Austrians and Germans really got along even before World War I. Then he annexed the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia in the pretext of it having ethnic Germans. He did so with the approval of Britain and France in the Munich Conference, who warned Hitler not to carry out any more invasions. On 15th March 1939, Germany invaded the entire Czech Republic. This was the last straw for the Allies, who warned Germany another invasion would lead to war. Hitler wanted war, however, he switched up his strategy. In order to avoid a two-front war like that in World War I, he decided to first eliminate the threat of a Soviet invasion from the east by signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact on 23rd August 1939. It was a non-aggression pact to help out both of them with mutual peace and more trade. It also secretly divided the rest of Eastern Europe between the two. For Hitler, this pact eliminated threats of a two-front war, while for Stalin, it provided valuable time to rebuild the Red Army, which was damaged by his purges. With over 1 million men and 66 divisions on the Polish border, Hitler ordered an invasion. On 1st September 1939, the Wehrmacht marched into Poland with complete air superiority, 2,750 tanks, and 2,315 aircraft, as Britain and France declared war on Germany. After the main Polish forces were destroyed, the Soviets also invaded Poland about 2 weeks after the German invasion. After the invasion, the Allies were building up military defenses across the border to deter a German invasion. Throughout the war until 1940, Germany was importing iron from Sweden. The Allies feared further buildup of the Wehrmacht and wanted to cut off German access to iron from Sweden, planning an invasion. Under Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, the British made plans to invade Norway and take control of Swedish iron fields. Hitler made the first move, though, by invading both Denmark and Norway on 9th April 1940. He sent massive air raids to Norway to strengthen German superiority on Norway's airfields. The Allies landed troops on Norway, but German troops were stationed in Norway and drove the Allies away, leading to a defeat for the Allies. However, 1 month after the invasion of Scandinavia was launched, Hitler ordered the invasion of France. On 10th May 1940, the Wehrmacht marched into all of Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France. The Allies sent troops straight towards the invading German forces, but here Hitler made a huge tactical move. He ordered the largest German force to remain in the Rhineland and counterattack the French on their borders. 50 German divisions invaded France's dense forests in the region of the Ardennes. They quickly moved and rapidly defeated the French forces there and moved towards the Allied forces approaching the invading forces and carried out a series of attacks called Blitzkrieg, in which they rapidly moved in smaller divisions and encircled the Allied troops and pushing them towards the shores. The Germans destroyed most of the French forces, while the British forces managed to escape at Dunkirk. The rest of France was conquered in some 40 days, and France officially surrendered on 25th June 1940. A puppet government called Vichy France was installed in its place. Germany also gained the colonial territories of France in Africa and Asia. The war in Africa. In Africa, Italy had colonized Libya in 1910, while they annexed Ethiopia in 1936. They conquered the British controlled Somalia in August 1940. They also occupied Albania after Mussolini's will to control the Mediterranean Sea. He also invaded Greece but got pushed back. The British also made landings in Egypt and pushed the Italians deep into Libya. Hitler sent General Rommel to take charge of the campaign in Libya, and General Rommel successfully pushed the British back. Meanwhile, a number of French colonies in equatorial Africa resisted German occupation and broke off to form an indirect France, which allied with Britain. Together, they conquered German controlled territories in the Middle East and other South African colonies. The war in Asia. Imperial Japan, led by Emperor Hirohito, was eager to conquer more and acquire natural resources unavailable in the Japanese mainland. Japan, as of 1941, was fighting in the Second Sino Japanese War, which started in 1937. Japan had conquered the northern region of China called Manchuria before World War I and advanced into China, capturing Beijing. However, by 1940, the war had come to a standstill as the Republic of China and the Communist Party of China worked together to defeat Japan. Japan found itself aligned with Nazi territorial aims and also embraced their ideology. Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Tripartite Pact to counter Allied intimidation on 27 September 1940. The Japanese had two plans for their invasion. The first was to invade Siberia, and the second was to invade Southeast Asia. Siberia was guarded by the Red Army and was hard to invade. Thus, the Japanese made plans to invade Southeast Asia. The two most powerful nations in Southeast Asia, the British and the Dutch, were out of control, since Britain was busy in Europe and the Netherlands were conquered. However, the United States still held the Philippines and posed a direct threat. The Japanese decided to carry out the invasion after damaging the US Navy. The plan was to weaken the US Navy for enough time so it could launch its invasion without fear. Thus, on 7th December 1941, the Japanese Air Force launched a surprise attack on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The Japanese didn't destroy any repair yards of the port, though, so the US could make a recovery. Not a fast one, though, since most of the Pacific Fleet's warships were destroyed. However, this way they could continue their invasion. They invaded all of Southeast Asia and by 1943 reached the borders of northern Australia and the borders of Assam in India and pushed into Myanmar. The Holocaust. The Holocaust was one of the largest genocides in human history and led to the death of over 6 million Jews. This almost ended Jewish culture and existence in Europe. The Holocaust was ran by a network of concentration camps throughout the Nazi Empire, which cleverly operated in secrecy. The Gestapo was responsible for the deployment of Jews into these camps. The Gestapo was a police force, but became the main force through which the Holocaust was carried out. The Gestapo had the right to deport Jews from any corner of the empire. They would arrest Jews and keep them in small confined areas in cities called ghettos. The Jews would be transferred from the ghettos to the concentration camps, a prison sort arrangement where Jews and unwanted groups would do labor and be exterminated. This was revolted though. Although most Germans were in favor of Nazism, some weren't. and did their best to spark resilience among the people against Hitler. Hans and Sophia Scholl did their part by spreading anti-Nazi propaganda in Munich. Irena Sandler also led this resistance by helping Jewish families in the Warsaw Ghetto to get their Jewish children to safety. She saved over 2,000 of these Jewish children and deported them to nursing homes, orphanages, churches, etc. Operation Barbarossa. Ever since Hitler came to power, he planned for an invasion of the Soviet Union. He had stated his hate and resentment towards the Slavs and Orthodox Christians in the Soviet Union in the Mein Kampf. He had planned for an invasion of Russia and had been making plans for it ever since Poland, the only buffer state between the two, was eliminated. The Wehrmacht built up its strength on the border with over 3 million troops. On 22nd June 1941, Hitler gave orders to invade the Soviet Union. Several battles were fought, and the immobilized Red Army took few months to even be ready to fight the war. The Germans steadily advanced, but had encountered a problem. Winter was approaching, and the Germans had learned about what a war during winter in Russia would be like from Napoleon. And thus, Hitler gave orders to complete the invasion by winter, thus ordering Operation Typhoon on 2nd October 1941. Then came the famous Battle of Moscow, which was the first major Russian victory in the war. This came at a cost though, with the first phase of the invasion costing 1.28 million Red Army soldiers and 400,000 Wehrmacht soldiers. This ended Germany's string of victories on 5th December and forced Germany to siege for the rest of the year. After the winter was over, Hitler continued the invasion, but shifted his strategy and goals. The German divisions in Russia were in requirement of oil to fuel their vehicles like tanks, jeeps, and motorbikes. But the oil had been frozen a lot of times and the Germans were in need of it. Thus, Hitler rerouted the main invasion force to attack the Transcaucasian states and take their oil. The German armies marched southeast and used the encirclement tactic. But it was here that Hitler made a blunder. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army to the Transcaucasian states, leaving the Wehrmacht's 6th Army left alone to march and encircle the Soviets by taking control of the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The 28th, 51st, 57th, 62nd, and 64th Red Army divisions were stationed in Stalingrad to fight, and it came to be one of the bloodiest battles of the war. The Battle of Stalingrad from 23rd August 1942 to 2nd Feb 1943 came at about 250,000 casualties for the Wehrmacht and 300,000 casualties for the Red Army. The battle, although expensive, was a Soviet victory, turning the tide of the entire war against Germany. This was the last time that Germany would advance into the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, and the mighty Red Army would invade the entire East Nazi Empire. The Battle of Stalingrad was won by the Red Army, not only due to more number of troops, but also because of more hardware. Once the invasion was first launched, the Soviet factories in the east began rapidly producing guns and tanks, with tanks not even being painted. Some famous Soviet tanks of World War II were the T-34 and the KV-1. After the Germans were being pushed back in the east, American forces, brought into the war by Japan, began sending financial and military aid to the Allies. They were also forced to ally with the Soviets. American and British forces made advances in Africa, liberated Africa from the Axis. The Americans, led by Franklin D. Roosevelt, wanted to launch a full scale invasion from northern France, since it would help in the liberation of France first, whereas Churchill wanted to attack from the southern tip of Italy. Both plans were launched. Italian forces fought poorly and surrendered to the Allies, with Mussolini being toppled from power. Hitler, by the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, knew the war was lost and only kept fighting, hoping for peace talks. The Allied troops were ordered to land on Normandy, and thus on 6th June 1944, the Normandy landings, or better called D-Day, was launched under the planning of General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The Allies invaded Normandy, while the Germans anticipated an attack on the Calais region in France. The Allies used deception tactics and cut off German reinforcements with naval aid also coming. The Germans were pushed out of France by late 1944, and the Allies approached the industrial heartland of Germany. Then came the last battle of the war in the form of the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler used his encirclement tactics once more and failed. Then the Wehrmacht collapsed and Germany was defeated, with the surrender of Germany in 7th May 1945, defeating Japan. After Germany's defeat in May 1945, Japan was left alone against all the Allied powers. The Japanese had known this and had prepared. The Japanese forces were loyal to the Japanese cause, believing that it was their destiny to conquer the region of East Asia. Thus, they devoted themselves to the war and decided to stand strong until they were defeated. The Japanese public too was in favor of this, believing that it was better to die in battle than to surrender. Thus, the Japanese fiercely defended their territory in Southeast Asia. The Japanese also supported people and organizations who were against the Allies. One of the most notable examples of these is the Japanese helping Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose forming the Indian National Army to overthrow the British Raj in India. The American Navy launched brutal campaigns to push the Japanese back. Australian forces made landings at northern Australia and liberated New Guinea. British and American forces set up bases in modern day India and invaded from the west to Japan. It was also here that the Bengal famine happened. After Germany's collapse, the US sent naval forces led by General Douglas MacArthur and Chester Nimitz to oversee the Pacific theater of the war. General MacArthur led the offensive to liberate Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia, while General Nimitz led the offensive to liberate the islands in the Pacific Ocean controlled by Japan, who took them from Germany in World War I. The Japanese fought fiercely, but defeat seemed inevitable. On 6th August 1945, the United States of America dropped an atom bomb on Hiroshima and dropped another one on Nagasaki 3 days later. This turned not only the tide of the war but also the world, since such powerful weapons were required to maintain national security. However, after all this and millions of casualties, the Japanese finally agreed to Allied peace talks and surrendered on 2nd September 1945. Aftermath of the war. World War II remains the single most bloody event in the 20th century. The war led to the death of over 6 million Jews over the course of the Holocaust. The war also demonstrated the effects of global war and was the last time that formal declaration of war ever happened. Out of the conflict, many new countries of Africa and Asia were given independence. The war left two global superpowers, the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The war's effect will never be forgotten.